Hello, and welcome everyone to the very first episode of Submerged, a new podcast that will bring you stories from the front line of environmental research, policy, and community action from across Canada and the world by speaking directly to those working on the ground and in the lab. From climate change adaptation and environmental justice to fisheries science and water chemistry, hear firsthand how thought leaders from around the world are affecting change today and into the future. My name is Graham Stewart Robertson. I am the Executive Director of the Atlantic Coastal Action Program, or ACAP St. John, a dedicated group of climate change planners, geographers, and biologists working on projects ranging from studying harbor seal movements to water quality monitoring, stream habitat restoration, and climate change adaptation planning. The ACAP program itself began as an Environment Canada initiative in 1992, founding 16 organizations just like ours to help Atlantic Canadians restore and sustain local watersheds and adjacent coastal areas. From the beginning, the cornerstone of our work has been water quality monitoring and riparian and stream habitat improvements. As a community-based organization, public engagement and education have been integral to our mandate from day one. ACAP St. John has grown much since the 1990s, becoming an integral part of the community as an environmental incubator and trusted broker of local knowledge, environmental stewardship, and ecological mediation. We are kicking off this podcast series on World Water Day. United Nations World Water Day aims to ensure availability and sustainable management of water for all global citizens by 2030. Billions of people are still living without safe water. Their households, schools, workplaces, farms, and factories struggling to survive and thrive. And Canada is by no means excluded from this. In my own short lifetime, as many as 20% of Canada's First Nations communities routinely have drinking water advisories, a crisis which has still not been resolved to this day. In the year 2000, Walkerton, Ontario had an outbreak of waterborne gastroenteritis as a result of bacterial contamination that had been caused by what had been a trusted municipal water supply. The contamination had grave consequences for more than 2,000 people and resulted in 6 deaths. 2 town officials eventually pled guilty to charges of common nuisance stemming from this water contamination. And right here in the Maritime Provinces, ACAP St. John has long operated a coastal field program in and around the highly industrialized harbour of St. John at the estuary of the Woolastook, or St. John River. Today, this baseline monitoring field program is funded by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans Canada through the Oceans Protection Plan, a $1.5 billion initiative announced by the federal government to aim to protect Canada's marine environment and offers new possibilities for research in Indigenous and coastal communities. To talk more about this work, we have with us here today on Submerged 3 ACAP team members who will share their water stories and experiences. Roxanne McKinnon, Shauna Sands, and Bethany Reinhardt. Here with us first is Bethany. Welcome, Bethany.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So I wanted to ask you about ACAP St. John's core programs, which from the beginning have been water quality monitoring and watershed habitat restoration. Let's talk about that water quality monitoring and the biological monitoring in the context of this new ocean protection plan and the new coastal environmental baseline program from DFO that ACAP St. John is now part of. So maybe you could tell us a bit of what you're working on.
Yeah. So I'm coordinating the St. John Harbor baseline monitoring program, and it's part of the coastal environmental baseline program. That's a federal funded program that they chose 6 ports from around Canada that are considered kind of heavily trafficked ports, and St. John Harbor is actually one of those. So what we're going to be doing with other groups around the area that received funding just last week will be to monitor different endpoints around the harbor to just kind of get a baseline to see what's going on, the environmental impacts kind of that the port traffic and all aspects of the use of the St. John Harbor are having on the environment.
Wow, I mean, that sounds like a lot of work. What exactly will you be doing as a part of this? What can you tell us about that?
So for our portion, ACAP St. John's portion, we're going to be sampling three different things. We're going to be looking at fish communities at various sites. So this means we're going to count the number of species and how many of each species we caught. We're going to do this monthly at each site over multiple years. And we're also going to have water quality data at many sites. And we're going to be collecting sediment samples too and analyzing them for contaminants. So we'll be analyzing them for polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. And this is a class of contaminants that's related to oil and gas products, so it's pretty relevant for St. John.
Yeah, I would say so. So that's obviously a lot of data you're going out on a regular basis. What will all of this, all these measurements tell us?
Great question. So they'll tell us lots of things. Sampling fish, water quality, and sediment contaminants can give you a good snapshot of just kind of what's the human impact right now in the harbor. And if we measure that over time, we can monitor that over time. But it will be a development of a long-term program that will kind of give us a new normal. It'll define the normal for the harbor. And then moving forward, this can be used to judge whether the harbor's changing or any of the fish communities are changing in response to a certain stressor, like maybe a new industrial development or something like that. The chemistry component can tell us whether there are organic contaminants from human inputs in our water and sediments, so things that wouldn't naturally be there. So this could be from industrial inputs, from runoff, from the roads and drains, or maybe municipal wastewater too. Fish communities have been used for seeing changes in the environment for over a century around the world. So if you can see a species disappear maybe, then that could be an indicator that something's up in the water. Mm-hmm. Fishing is my favorite part of the fieldwork we do. It's pretty surprising sometimes what can come up from under the water. So when we went out in the forebay in Marsh Creek, which it's Lower Marsh Creek, so you wouldn't really expect there to be much. So we did one seine tow and we brought up over 9 species just in one seine tow. So it's a 3-minute long kind of haul of your net. Brought up 9 species. Mm. So that was pretty awesome to see.
Yeah, I mean, it's unbelievable the life that we find out here in St. John and in the Bay of Fundy. But, people might ask, why monitor these things at all? What's the significance of this?
Well, I think it's really important. So if you think of it from a human standpoint, I guess, industrial inputs can affect human health and fisheries productivity. So those are things that humans are kind of invested in. So it doesn't help just the marine life that you're kind of looking to protect. It also can help humans. I also think it's important now more than ever in the face of our changing climate to know the effects that our industrial activities and consumer choices are having on our local and global environments.
Yeah, and I think that's a great message for World Water Day overall. I mean, how do you see this work you're doing in St. John fitting into a bigger picture? In today when we're asked to think about the impacts of water across our planet, do you see this as a significant piece of that, or how does this fit into a bigger research question?
Yeah, I think that down the road this can definitely affect real change, and I mean, you've seen examples of this yourself with ACAP monitoring activities sparking actual change. So like the monitoring of Marsh Creek kind of led to, with the high fecal coliform, kind of led to the St. John Harbor cleanup and the stopping of dumping raw sewage into Marsh Creek and all of St. John Harbor. So that was kind of some monitoring that did help affect real change, and I think that ours could as well. So if we're starting to see things like really high contaminant levels in the sediments at certain sites, or if we see species drop off, I think that could affect real change in the future, how we kind of work our shipping activity or other industrial activity.
Yeah, that's a great example of how research, and it's a great scientific study, and being out in our environments can really impact not just those doing the work, but the societies that live and interact with those environments as a whole, and help decision makers make the right choices when it comes to the environment, and understanding what lives here, what the areas for improvement are, and what it really means for all of us who live and breathe our environment on a daily basis. So I want you to think kind of pie in the sky, think ahead in the future. Let's say your own research gets access to unlimited funding or unlimited access to resources to do whatever you want. How do you see that growing and changing moving forward? I mean, what would be your ideal study? Anything, work on anything within St. John, within Canada, anything to do with water? It's fun to think about, like, if I could do anything, if I could spend anything, money was no object, what part of science would you want to really drive forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there's a lot. Sometimes I get stuck in a little contaminants bubble because that's where my background is, studying contaminants in fish. Mm-hmm. So it definitely would be related to that. But I love that question, and I think that it would be considering where we live and how St. John is so industrialized. I think that it is really important to kind of know the effects that the contaminants we put into the water the effects that these are having on the ecosystems. And while there's a little bit of contaminants work that's done on the harbor and in the river, it's not extensive. And I think for such an industrialized area, it would really benefit from having more kind of contaminants like mercury, or especially even upriver where people are more likely to kind of recreationally fish and eat those fish. I think that it's important to monitor contaminants in edible species and also throughout the whole food web. Maybe even some seals. That would be pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's a fantastic answer. The idea that we can think about not just what is important to us today, but what do we need to measure so that the next generation of scientists, the next generation of decision makers, people living in a community have access to baseline information, to data, so that they can make better choices. It's only because of the work of those that came before, people like you and I, that we're able to do the research and the policy work we do today. So I think it's a great lesson that there's always another question, there's always another piece of data, and sometimes we don't know what is going to be needed in the future, but I think it's really exciting. I really hope that you reach that goal of studying those contaminants in your bubble someday.
My bubble.
Thanks so much, Bethany, for joining us today. I'm excited to hear, maybe on a future episode, what the progress of your field season is like, and what the outcomes from this year's research show us, because it sounds like it's a phenomenal opportunity to get out into the environment, to interact with these fish, to get these real, tangible results from our environment. And I think we all appreciate the work that you do.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be the first guest.
Next up, we have Wildlife Conservation Coordinator Shauna Sands to talk about seal monitoring under the Coastal Environmental Baseline Program. Welcome to Submerged, Shauna.
Thanks for having me, Graham.
Now, Shauna is our Mammal Conservation Coordinator here at ACAP St. John. She's worked on a multitude of projects from riparian habitat plantings to beach cleanups and watershed monitoring. Her current project is looking at monitoring harbor seals for the Coastal Environmental Baseline Program with DFO. So, Shauna, tell us a little bit about what you're working on with this.
Sure. So most St. John residents actually assume that the population of harbor seals is quite abundant here in the city because we often see them hauled out on various rocks along the harbor and can sometimes see them swimming along the St. John River. Believe it or not, though, the population of harbor seals hasn't been studied in over 30 years.
Wow.
So the purpose of this project is for the next 2.5 years, we'll monitor the number of harbor seals throughout the harbor itself. So in order to do this, we will be heading out into the field bi-weekly, so once every 2 weeks, to the predetermined haul-out sites at low tide. Since seals often haul out at rocks at low tide to relax and to warm up in the sun, we are able to count the seals that have hauled out to determine the population numbers over time. We do have only a short window when it comes to looking for seals, so in order to be consistent, we must go out and look for seals at low tide when it's in the middle of the afternoon and when the weather is above minus 10 degrees. So that might not be an issue in the summer, but this winter we've had a little bit of an issue because of all the ice and the snow and the weather being so cold. But we were still able to observe the seals. We were able to do this using spotting scopes and binoculars and long camera lenses. And we also will sometimes fly the drone to survey the area as well. We're using the same methodology that they did in the 1980s, and hopefully we'll be able to compare the numbers that they found in the 80s to the numbers that we see today. And we're also hoping to satellite tag some of the seals in the fall, so stay tuned for that. And we'll be able to monitor some of their location habits, some of the temperatures that they're seeing in the water, and hopefully the dive depth as well.
Wow. Now, that's obviously a lot of data, and we were talking to your colleague Bethany about this earlier in the episode about what the significance of all that data is. So why, if I'm a member of the general public who just sees these seals, as you mentioned sometimes, why is it important for us to monitor these marine mammals in St. John Harbor? I mean, they're there, obviously. Why do we need to monitor them?
That's a good question. There's hardly any studies done on marine mammals in the harbor itself, so to expand that and to fill those gaps is very important. So long-term monitoring on a species is very critical to determine any changes in a population, including their numbers, migration patterns, any type of behavior, ecological health, that sort of thing. So if we continue to gather data on harbor seals over the years, we can use that data to monitor the species long term.
So it sounds like that information gap is really key there. And I'm assuming that then these harbor seals must play an important role in the ecological framework of the ecosystem here. And why is that important? If you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, they do, actually. They consume a considerable amount of fish here in the harbor, which helps control our region's aquatic food chain. So most marine mammal populations across the oceans are undergoing declines and recoveries. So in order to understand that, we need to look at the harbor seal's ecological role, and that will help predict any changes to their population over time.
So getting that picture, you mentioned 30 years ago, and now here again in 2019, 2020, we're really getting that full-scale image of what the framework of the ecosystem is and how these populations might be recovering. That's fantastic.
Yeah, exactly.
So how do you think the field program has changed over the years? Will your sampling be along those same lines, or will it have changed or using new technologies? Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so like I said before, we are using the same methodology as they did in the 1980s. They did aerial surveys using helicopters. Unfortunately, we don't have those funds to rent a helicopter every 2 weeks, but we are lucky that technology has advanced so much that we're able to count seals directly from land using those long lens scopes and the fancy binoculars and that sort of thing. So Dr. Jack Terhune, actually, he's a seal biologist with the University of New Brunswick. He was the lead on the previous seal studies done in the harbor. He found found that the seals tend to move further down south in the winter, mainly just kind of coasted down to Maine. And they weren't here in the St. John Harbor in the winter. But he thinks that the population numbers of harbor seals have increased since then, and they are not leaving like they used to, which we have seen in the last couple months when we were out looking at the seals. We have seen many seals hauled out on the rocks throughout the winter. So that could mean a possibility that they aren't moving down south anymore, and their population numbers have increased.
Well, it sounds like a fantastic study, Shauna, and I think probably one of the most captivating for the population here locally. I mean, the marine mammals and seals in particular are quite popular with children on through to all ages because of their appeal to the general population. I think it's going to be really exciting to see how this study progresses and to see maybe some more images and videos coming out of your new technological methods of sampling these going forward. It sounds like an incredible new study here in St. John Harbor.
I think so as well.
Great, thanks, Shauna. It's been wonderful having you on the show.
Thank you very much.
Next on the program, we have Roxanne McKinnon, the Urban Ecology Coordinator of ACAP St. John. Welcome to Submerged, Roxanne.
Thanks, Graham.
So as you've no doubt worked on many projects in your 2-year tenure at ACAP, can you tell us a little bit about habitat restoration projects in the areas around St. John that you've been involved with?
Absolutely. As St. John is an old city, ensuring appropriate wildlife habitat, especially for aquatic habitat, was often forgotten or undervalued in old development initiatives in the city. So that has led to some degraded habitats that need restoration, and that's where a lot of our work has been focused on. So since I started at ACAP, I've been involved in many habitat restoration projects ranging from community tree plantings to wetland enhancement, to culvert removals, and green space revitalizations to help both wildlife habitat and also creating beautiful spaces that community can enjoy and appreciate.
Wow, that's certainly a wide variety of different work. Why do you think all of that's so important when it comes to the theme of today's show, which is about World Water Day and thinking about those aquatic habitats here in the city?
Yeah, absolutely. So Often in urban environments, we forget that we share it with wildlife species. So things like birds and mammals, fish, amphibians. So when restoring and improving those habitats really helps to make sure that their needs are being met and that they're not under threat from actions that we are doing. And how that ties into World Water Day. For ACAP in particular, most of our projects are along streams and rivers, and that ties directly into ensuring quality water for both humans and wildlife to enjoy. So healthy vegetated riparian or streamside areas help protect water quality by acting as a buffer between our human actions and the water. So in those areas, all that buffering action actually leads to better quality water so that both wildlife can thrive in that environment and we can have recreation contact and protect our drinking water sources.
Yeah, those sound like pretty universal themes, not just here in St. John. I mean, do you think that is that what you would describe as the largest concerns regionally or globally when it comes to water security? Is that idea of access or having those buffer areas?
Absolutely. So access both in terms of communities being able to get clean water and having access to water that is of quality to be used for drinking water without being under boil advisories or having to walk to another community to get water, or just having that access to be able to have drinking water that you depend on for your life.
Yeah, I think we opened the show talking about the risks to water supplies that Canada's seen in the past in our First Nations communities in Walkerton, Ontario, and I think it sounds like you're really addressing some of those big topics here in New Brunswick. Do you think that this habitat restoration you were talking about and these ideas of tree planting or vegetation, and you mentioned beautification, really help the community? Like, how do you see that motivating a community to take a role in its water and to take that sense of ownership out of these big water management entities and the government down to the community level?
Yeah. So restoring natural areas benefits the community in a whole slew of different ways. From the volunteers that get to come out and help us do these activities, so plant trees in these areas, it gets them out in nature where they can reconnect with it and gain the many well-being and mental health benefits of spending time in nature that have been documented in various studies. And then the completed projects also help to improve stormwater. They provide shade in urban environments. They provide windbreaks to help for heating and cooling. And they also improve aesthetics and the natural feel to the community, which is a huge benefit to many communities. And it provides the access to natural green spaces that community members might not have otherwise.
Yeah, and that's so important in our age of having people get out in the environment, spend time there. Roxanne, it's been really phenomenal having you on the program. And I know you mentioned several times communities and people doing volunteer plantings and things like that. Is there a way that anyone listening could get involved in those activities?
Absolutely. So if you go onto the ACAP website, you can sign up to our volunteer network, and you can also look at our upcoming events.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much, Roxanne. I want to thank our three guests, Roxanne McKinnon, Bethany Reinhardt, and Shauna Sands, for taking the time to participate in the very first episode of the Submerged podcast. We hope this first episode has opened your eyes to the incredible work taking place around water in one small corner of Atlantic Canada, recognizing that the role of communities, young people, and science are going strong in Canada's oldest incorporated city. Upcoming episodes of Submerged will feature interviews with individuals from across the region and the country, so be sure to subscribe to our feed and follow our podcast by visiting acapsj.org, as Submerged continues to bring you stories from the front line of environmental research, policy, and community action from across Canada and the world. Until next time, I'm Graham Stewart Robertson. Submerged has been produced and distributed to you by ACAP St. John, an environmental nonprofit that has been working in St. John, New Brunswick, Canada since 1992.